Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 1 of Applied Occupational Theory. What's a theory for? So today we're going to talk about and discuss why it is that we use theory in occupational therapy and how do we go about using theory. Let's consider which was first, the practice of occupational therapy or the theory of occupational therapy. Did the first OTs have an idea about what would work, or did they simply go out there and try things and then come up with the theory afterwards? Well, Ann Mosey says that it is both and. We had an idea about what would work based on our philosophy, our assumptions in occupational therapy, our ethics, art, and science. And with that, an occupational therapist would develop a model about what would work in therapy, and then combine that with a frame of reference. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is here a little bit later on. As we practice those things and see what happens as we practice them, we collect data, which then might lead us to research, which then leads us to refine our model, refine our way of thinking. So this chicken and egg thing happens in a loop all the time. It started that way from the very beginning when we had the idea of moral treatment. We would put that into practice and we started to get more ideas about what would work. I think about Eleanor Clark Slagle, and you might say that her model was moral treatment, but her frame of reference was her habit training. And that is how theory began in occupational therapy. So here are some of the many things that go into applied occupational therapy theory, including our core values, philosophy, sort of the background, the idea of medicine, also psychology and social sciences, and then many of those social movements, including the arts and crafts movement and moral treatment that went into the development of occupational therapy. Of course, we have some of our original theorists, who I think you should have learned a little bit about in issues class, and then some of our more modern day theorists, including Gary Kilhoffner, Carolyn Baum, and Michael Iwama, who developed one of our most recent occupation-based models that we'll be learning about, the Kawa theory. We organize theory in occupational therapy according to paradigm, occupation-based models, and frames of reference. And this way of thinking comes from our authors, Cole and Tufano. A paradigm is sort of that overarching theme, that broad view, those different aspects that go into occupational therapy. And if you watch the Umbrella of Theory video, I go into this in a little more detail. Occupation-based models are usually visual, that give us this overarching view of what occupation should include for each specific client. And frames of reference are practice guidelines in specific domains of occupational therapy, which may or may not have been written for occupational therapists. Here's just another depiction of what this looks like, sort of the overarching umbrella, the models, and then the frames of reference, which gives us a handle of how to what actually we do in therapy. So let's talk a little bit more about paradigm. And of course, the organizing principle or the paradigm in occupational therapy is the idea of occupation, the idea that we have an entire profession based on the idea of occupation because we think it's that important. As part of our paradigm, we have the occupational therapy practice framework, which gives us our overarching view of what occupational therapy would be. In Canada, they have the Canadian model of occupational performance, which is both a paradigm and an occupation-based model because it can be applied specifically to individual clients. The most important thing of the Canadian model of occupational performance is that it is based on client-centered practice, as are many of the principles in our OT practice framework as well. So what is an occupation-based model? It's an organizing technique or theory that tell us how to categorize ideas and to structure these approaches. There are many different words that we use to describe occupation-based models. In Cole and Tufano, we use occupation-based model, but we also use things like overarching theories, umbrella theories, meta theories, or grand theories about what occupation is all about. So a model can be a picture. So if I show you this picture and say, hey, I'm going to build a Lego model of the Millennium Falcon, do you all of a sudden start to think of a specific movie? So it's a visual representation of certain concepts. So if you think of the model of human occupation, it visually represents certain concepts. And it's a visual representation. So here's another visual representation. If you see these two circles overlapping and the words being and doing and the little stick figure in the middle, what sentence might you make? What theoretical conclusions might you make just from the visual model? So we see the principles, being and doing, and we see that there's a relationship between being and doing based on this visual model. It's helping us organize our concepts, and that's what an occupation-based model does for us. It shows us the relationships between the principles, and it gives us sort of a concept of what occupation-based practice should be. So, in occupational therapy, this occupation-based model helps to organize our thoughts centered around the idea of occupation. They often give us tools for tools for evaluation and guidance for intervention as well. So what's a frame of reference? How is it different from an occupation-based model? Well, if you think about what a frame does, a frame sections off something and it gives focus to other things as well. It also gives you some handles for how you can hold on to something. So a frame is very practical and useful, and that's exactly what our frames of reference are. The definition is practice guidelines in specific domains, which are produced from the knowledge of the profession. Now, other professions might lead into this as well. So think about the concept of biomechanics. Who else uses biomechanics besides occupational therapists? Well, physical therapists, orthopedic physicians, athletic trainers, exercise science. So lots of people use biomechanics. Of course, we use it in a particular way, but we have specific practice guidelines from the principles of biomechanics that help us know what to do. That's what makes it a frame of reference. It's a specific domain. Not everybody needs a biomechanical frame of reference. For a child with autism, you're not going to use biomechanics to treat them. That's not going to be the frame of reference that they need. So we need a different frame of reference that gives us practice guidelines for that domain if we're going to be treating clients with autism. So how is it different from an occupation-based model? Okay, so that's a very long, windy definition by Mosey that basically says the same thing. There's these consistent concepts and definitions, but they're held together by this idea that they give us guidelines within a certain domain of concern. So a frame of reference and even an occupation-based model are organized by looking at these different aspects. And actually what we're going to be covering in these next couple of slides are the aspects that you're going to analyze in every theory that we study using your theory analysis worksheet. You're going to break down each theoretical perspective according to what is their focus, what's it there for, what are the basic assumptions, the principles, the postulates, the definitions, the terms, the relationships that make up this theory? What sets this theory apart from other theories? How do we know that we're looking at biomechanics instead of a theory of motor learning or an applied behavior theory? What are the function and disability continuums? Within this theory, how do we define function for an individual, and how do we define dysfunction or disability? What's the range of issues that a person can have? And also, how do we get them from here to there? What are the ways in which we help a person to change from point A, where they start, to point B, where we envision them being by the end? So how does theory guide research? Here's a very old picture of me meeting one of my occupational therapy heroes, Helen Cohen, who is a theorist in the area of occupational therapy and vestibular rehab. And she had a theory about what would work with individuals with their balance in terms of basically using daily living activities. And she did some research based on that. So part of what we do when we're creating our evidence is to get an idea about what might work in practice and then testing it out. So theory guides research in that way. Theory then guides practice in that other people have asked a lot of questions about what's going to work for an individual and tested it out and written papers on it. And we can access that literature to get an idea about what is going to help us in practice. A really very straightforward example of this would be with hand therapy. Many people have had ideas about what's going to work with someone who's had a tendon injury. Is there a type of splinting? How long do they have to be splinted? What are the exercises that they have to do? Those aspects have been researched. We now have guidelines then for what we exactly do with people based on that theoretical perspective and the research that followed. So how are you feeling about theory right now? If you go to lessons, there will be a link to a theory response quiz that's going to tell me a little bit about what you're thinking about theory right now. Do watch the theory tour, the tour through the Carl of Theory video before you respond to that, because it asks you some questions about which theories are starting to strike you as interesting at this point in time. There is also a syllabus quiz. I am not fond of reading the syllabus to people, so you get to read the syllabus quiz for yourself and go through the syllabus and answer some of the questions based on that. That's also a Google Forms link that you can find in lessons. So looking forward to exploring theory with you, and I'll see you in lab. Thank you.